The Palace of Velcarith was a monument to everything the Varani Empire had ever conquered. Its towers were carved from moon-white stone quarried on 17 different worlds. Its corridors stretched for kilometers, lined with silk tapestries depicting the defeat of lesser civilizations. Banners bearing the silver serpent of House Vera hung from every archway, each one embroidered by the hands of servants who had never once been asked their names. And at the center of all of it, in a chamber whose ceiling was painted with the faces of every Varani sovereign for the last 4,000 years, sat Princess Lyra Vera, heir to the eternal throne, daughter of the celestial bloodline, first voice of the undying court. She was also, by her own private estimation, profoundly bored. Not bored in the way that lesser beings grew bored. Bored in the way that only someone who had been given everything could be bored, with a heaviness behind the eyes that no amount of ceremony could touch. Every day was mapped out from the moment she opened her eyes. Morning protocols. Dietary consultations. Language drills in 7 imperial tongues. Afternoon audiences with ministers who spoke only to the space slightly above her head, as though addressing the crown rather than the person wearing it. No one had ever asked her what she liked. Not once. Not in 23 years of living. It simply wasn't done. Ethan Cross arrived on a Tuesday. He wasn't supposed to be there at all. The original human liaison assigned to the Varani diplomatic exchange program had come down with something called Cathari fever, a rash and vertigo combination that the palace physicians found fascinating in an academic sense and treated not at all. His replacement, Ethan, had been pulled from a hospital posting on the agricultural moon of Durev 3, where he'd spent the last 2 years performing triage on farmers and occasionally performing surgery in a tent during dust storms. He walked into the palace with a duffel bag, a thermos of cold coffee, and the particular calm of someone who had seen enough chaos that marble hallways no longer impressed him. The senior court chamberlain, a 7-foot Varani named Sorvek, met him at the entrance with barely concealed disdain. "You are the human caregiver assigned to Her Highness." "That's me," Ethan said. "You are aware that Princess Lyra Vera is of the celestial bloodline. That she has walked the 7 consecrated paths. That she has received the blessing of the undying court and—" "Is she sick?" Ethan asked. Sorvek blinked. 3 eyelids. All 3. She is not sick, precisely. She has been experiencing fatigue. Low resonance in her bioluminescent markers. Reduced appetite. A decline in what our healers call. When did she last sleep through the night? Another pause. That is, not recorded. When did she last eat a full meal? Her dietary intake is managed by a council of. When did she last leave this building? Sorvek's mandibles twitched. The princess does not leave. She receives visitors. She. Ethan nodded slowly, like a man building a diagnosis in real time. Okay. Take me to her. Lyra had been informed that a human was coming. She had not been informed that he would walk into her receiving chamber, glance at the 7-course meal laid out untouched on her table, look directly at her, not above her head, not past her, but at her, and say, "You haven't eaten." She drew herself up. She was quite good at drawing herself up. "I was not hungry." "That's fine." He set his bag down on a chair that was definitely not meant for bags. "Are you hungry now?" She stopped. No one had ever asked that either. "Perhaps." He opened his bag and produced, of all things, a small wrapped package. He unfolded it on the corner of the table. Inside were 2 dense, dark squares that smelled of something warm and foreign. "What is that?" she asked before she could stop herself. "Brownies. My sister makes them. I grabbed some before I left because I knew I was going to be stressed." He pushed one toward her. "You look like you've also been stressed." Lyra stared at the brownie. Then at him. "You are supposed to assess my health markers." "I am." He sat down, in a chair, uninvited, without ceremony. You're not sleeping. You're not eating. Your bioluminescent markers are suppressed, which in humans we'd call pallor. Your posture is perfect, which tells me you've been performing rather than living for a very long time. He tilted his head. Am I wrong? She picked up the brownie. She took a small, careful bite. It was extraordinary. Dense and sweet and warm in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. You are not wrong, she said quietly. He stayed for 3 weeks. He was supposed to stay for 5 days. No one quite knew how to make him leave, and after the second week, no one really wanted to. The thing about Ethan Kross was that he asked questions. Relentlessly. Cheerfully. Without any apparent awareness that questions were not simply asked of a princess of the celestial bloodline. Do you prefer cold or warm rooms? He asked, adjusting the climate controls in her chamber without consulting the Council of Atmospheric Standards. What kind of music do you like, or do you hate music? He had a small speaker that he'd connected to something called a playlist, and he played it while he reviewed her medical charts, a low and rhythmic sound that Lyra found herself swaying to before she realized she was doing it. What did you want to be, when you were small? Before all this? That one stopped her completely. She stood at her window, looking out at the 1,000-year city below, and she thought about it for a long time. Ethan waited. He was very good at waiting. He didn't fill silences with reassurances or bow and retreat. He simply existed in the room with her, steady and unhurried, like something that had taken root. I wanted to study deep water creatures, she finally said. The ones in the Mithrani Trench. I read every record we had of them. I drew them in my lesson books. She paused. My tutors removed the drawings. They said it was not becoming of my station. Ethan was quiet for a moment. That's a terrible thing to do to a kid. She turned to look at him. No one had ever said that. Not in 23 years. On the last day before he was meant to leave, Ethan Kross arrived at her chamber with a large flat package wrapped in rough brown paper. He handed it to her without ceremony or explanation. Inside was a book. Enormous. Heavy. Its cover was embossed with a creature she recognized instantly, a spiral-shelled thing with luminous trailing limbs, one she had drawn over and over in the margins of suppressed lesson books. A complete survey of the Mithrani Deep, documented species of the abyssal thermal vents, it read. Compiled by the Virani Institute of Natural Sciences, year 2847 of the Eternal Reckoning. How did you find this? She breathed. Your palace library. 3rd sublevel, Eastern Archive. Someone had filed it under irrelevant natural studies. He shrugged. I have a habit of wandering places I'm not supposed to. She held the book and felt something shift in her chest, some slow, tectonic thing that had been locked in place for 2 decades. No one has ever, she stopped. Ever what? She looked up at him. At his unremarkable human face, with its laugh lines and its tired eyes and its complete immunity to the weight of her title. No one has ever wondered what I liked, she said. Not once. You are the first. Ethan Kross looked at her for a moment. Then he said, with the same directness he brought to everything. That's a terrible thing too. For what it's worth, you like deep water creatures, warm chocolate, music with a low rhythm, cold rooms in the morning, and long silences that don't have to mean anything. I wrote it down. He tapped the side of his head. Professionally. For the medical record. Lyra Vera, princess of the celestial bloodline, daughter of the undying court, first voice of Velkareth, laughed. It was the first real laugh in 23 years. He left the next morning. She stood at the window and watched the transport lift off, and she held the book in both hands. Around her, the palace breathed its ancient, ceremonial breath. Ministers waited in corridors. Schedules unscrolled themselves on tablets. The eternal reckoning continued, indifferent and vast. But in her chest, something small and stubborn had come back to life. A human had asked what she liked. No one had ever asked before. She opened the book to the first page, and she began to read. Across the galaxy, humans were doing this constantly, wandering into palaces and hospitals and war zones and impossible situations, looking at whatever powerful, ancient, magnificent thing stood before them and asking, "But are you okay? Have you eaten? What did you actually want to be?" They couldn't help it. It was, perhaps, their most devastating quality.